Chapter 4 from the Dawn Horse Testament. The Testament of Secrets of the Divine World Teacher and True Heart Master, Da Avabasa, the Bright. November 1991. Then I prepare you for the way of the heart, by giving you my word at heart, and always standing there, so that you, by heart response to my word, and my heart responsive feeling contemplation of my bodily human form, my spiritual and always blessing presence, and my very and inherently perfect state, will realize you too are only the heart itself. After 30 years of submission to conditional existence, my own ordeal, by which I came again to divine self-realization, and then began to teach the way of the heart, culminated in most profound self-inquiry in the form avoiding relationship. In that self-inquiry, the act and the results of self-contraction of the body-mind were loosened in merely witnessing consciousness itself, and a spontaneous revelation took place. There was spontaneous tacit awareness as that to which, and in and as which, the self-contraction, all thoughts, and all conditional appearances are arising. Thus, enquiry into and recognition of the conditional self and its tacit underlying root feeling of relatedness itself was spontaneously replaced by tacit awareness as the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self, or the self-existing and self-radiant feeling of being itself. And it became obvious that consciousness itself is inherently love blissful and free. Even more, it became obvious that all conditional appearances are only apparent modifications of consciousness itself, and no such modifications bind or change it. Even more, as conditional appearances arose, and were thus divinely recognized, the self-existing and self-radiant power and divine love bliss pervaded them all, divinely transfiguring and divinely transforming them. Therefore, who I am, the inherent or native feeling of being itself, stands free, self-existing and self-radiant, even in the midst of apparent conditions. This realization developed through a progress of extraordinary revelations until it was fully and finally and inherently perfected in the great event of my divine reawakening. Immediately after that great event, my work or play for the sake of the awakening of others spontaneously began. Suddenly, many extraordinary siddhas, or great bright blessing powers, appeared, and with them many unusual natural siddhas, or uncommon psychophysical abilities and processes. My teaching work began mysteriously, and by these means. Again and again in vision, I saw vast numbers of my future listening devotees, and hearing devotees, and seeing devotees. Originally, I blessed and taught them simply by meditating them thus, in vision. Eventually, they began to come into my physical company, and the work continued there, equally spontaneously. This is how I began to teach, and over time, by observing and responding to what those who came to me required, I was moved to serve them in a lively and even unconventional manner. In my responsive observation of all those who came to me, I realized that I could, and indeed that, for their sake, it would be necessary for me to submit to their conditions of existence, reflect them to themselves in order to stimulate and awaken their self-understanding, and gradually draw them out of self-bondage by attracting them to the spiritual, transcendental, and divine condition of God, truth, or reality. Therefore, I did all of that. Within a year after the great event of my divine reawakening, a small number of individuals had begun to associate with me on a regular basis for the sake of the self-transcending practice in my company. Their commitment to the great process was weak. Their qualifications were not great. My spontaneous or crazy teaching work had barely begun. Even so, it became time to openly announce my availability and to embrace my teaching work or sacrifice from the heart. Therefore, on the basis of a free heart impulse and no great reception in the world, I began the fierce labour and the humorous love ordeal of my formal teaching work. That labour or ordeal was to continue until my word of revelation and instruction was fully generated. The necessary first physical agents were empowered and established. The original and progressively developing cultural means were called into being, and at least a good number of my listening devotees were, by devotional listening, entered into the foundation practice of the self-transcending way of the heart. This testament is the evidence of the completion of my formal teaching work. This testament is my summary word of heart that forever speaks the way of the heart itself, that is perfected and perfectly revealed in the feeling contemplation of my bodily human form, my spiritual and always blessing presence, and my very and inherently perfect state. In this testament, I will describe each and all of the forms and possible developmental stages of by me given practice of the way of the heart, including the entire and progressive process of reality considerations and the potential and progressive stages of life and of progressive and ultimately inherently perfect realization that develop in the way of the heart, in its technically fully elaborated form and in its technically simpler form and in its technically simplest form. Then, now and hereafter, I am merely present, and present as constant love and blessing to all beings. Therefore, I am most attractive to all my listening devotees, and to all my hearing devotees, and to all my seeing devotees. And I am always available for their right and free regard of my great heart revelation, which right and free regard is to be progressively expressed through meditation and every kind of auspicious exercise of the heart. And all of this heart regard of me becomes, progressively and spontaneously, by grace, right and free regard and realization of the spiritual, transcendental, and divine self-condition in which my listening devotee, my hearing devotee, and my seeing devotee stand eternally. All of my work with those who first and earliest came to me, and every word that I spoke and sometimes also wrote for their sake and for the sake of all who would listen to me and hear me and see me in the course of time, was and is a consideration and an elaboration, or a detailing and a summarizing of the word and the way of the heart that I have always and consistently offered, even from the very beginning of my work as heart teacher and free true heart master. My word is simple. I say, attend to me, and thereby understand and transcend your own activity. If anyone will feel and examine his or her psychophysical state in any moment, whether under the worst or under the best, or under the most ordinary of circumstances, he or she will surely discover that there is always a characteristic feeling of stress or dis-ease, or a motivating sense of dilemma. Therefore, human life characteristically felt as such stress, dis-ease, or dilemma is also always characterized by struggle, or a generally uninspected and never finally satisfied search for release and fulfillment. The usual life is always actively involved, whether consciously or unconsciously, in this motivated search and this native distress. Therefore, every such a one is involved in programs of seeking via desire in all kinds of relations and circumstances. My word is a direct address to the distress and the search of each individual. I do not suggest a way or a method by which to seek. Instead, I call the individual to observe himself or herself, to feel and examine the distress that motivates the life of seeking itself. Through self-surrendering and truly self-forgetting, feeling contemplation of my bodily human form, my spiritual and always blessing presence, and my very and inherently perfect state, and in the constant context of that practice of feeling contemplation, through real consideration of my heart confessions, my teaching arguments, my fundamental questions, and the leelas or stories of all my work, whereby I have reflected individuals to themselves and blessed them to awaken, interested and truly devoted individuals can, by grace, come to understand and transcend themselves. The initial process of listening to the degree of hearing is one of self-observation, truly felt, whether by the primary practice of devotion and insight, or by the primary practice of devotion and faith, until that self-observation becomes a crisis of most fundamental self-understanding. At first, in the listening course of the way of the heart, the individual becomes acutely aware of his or her habits of seeking, desiring, doubting, believing, manipulating, betraying, and always returning to the same distress and want. Then, as the crisis of most fundamental understanding approaches, it suddenly becomes clear that all of that is being motivated by a constant feeling of distress, which is the result of self-contraction in the face of all relations and conditions. This discovery is most profound. It is as if a person in pain suddenly discovers that he or she is pinching his or her own flesh, and this discovery produces immediate relief as the pinching ceases, as soon as the pinching ceases. Therefore, as soon as an individual discovers that the painful search that occupies his or her life is being created by a fundamental feeling of distress, attention is free to examine that distress itself. And when that distress is directly and profoundly examined, it is discovered that it is the result of a chronic and self-induced contraction of the body-mind, or most simply the habitual and ultimately always voluntary and unnecessary avoidance or self-contracting refusal of relationship and relatedness. Every apparent individual thing, circumstance, or condition arises, survives, changes, and disappears dependently or always already related within the cosmic universe, which is continuous, whole, and all-containing. By definition and in fact, there is not, nor can there be, any separate, self-contained, independent, or self-sufficient, conditional individual, thing, circumstance, or event. However, by reaction to all apparent vulnerability, and otherwise by forgetting or by failing to notice or intuit the whole and the inherently perfect, which inherently transcends even the whole, the tendency of every conditionally manifested individual is to contract into presumed separateness, or a self-deluded, self-defended, and self-contracted emotional, mental, psychic, physical, and social state of isolation, presumed independence, and dramatized want. This tendency is chronic in everyone, and it is not generally even inspected, nor is it, without inspection, understood. Therefore, everyone seeks, and all seeking is inevitably frustrated. The self-contracting habit itself is not and cannot ever be transcended in, or by means of, the search, because the search is itself the dramatization of the self-contracting habit itself. I call everyone to feel and to thoroughly observe and to transcend the habit of egoity. Eventually, anyone who truly listens to my word and, by the means I have given and always give, fully embraces the ordeal of feeling contemplation of me and observation of the ego I, will surely, truly and most profoundly discover the root of seeking and suffering, which is the self-contraction, the complex avoidance of relationship, or the habit of narcissus. When this discovery is by grace truly and fully made and felt, relative summarily to every aspect of personal existence, a crisis of spontaneous and not strategic release is enjoyed. And when it is truly and most fundamentally understood that self-contraction is the motivating pain of life, it becomes increasingly possible in every moment of the feeling contemplation of my bodily human form, my spiritual and always blessing presence, and my very and inherently perfect state, to inquire into the self-contraction, avoiding relationship, and thereby feel beyond the self-contraction, or otherwise, in the manner of the devotional way of faith, to directly feel beyond the self-contraction, and thus progressively and ultimately to enjoy a native sense of freedom and fullness of being. And anyone who has, through responsive devotional listening to me, thus become responsible for this actively self-transcending or directly counter-egoic feeling capability, has heard me truly. The way of the heart, or the practice that is the heart itself, is begun through the necessary devotional practice of listening, or by feeling contemplation of my bodily human form, and all-revealing form, and by likewise devotional consideration of my heart-revealing word and leelas. But the way of the heart, or the practice that is the heart itself, becomes directly effective, and effective in the most fundamental or directly self-transcending manner, only with real and true hearing. Therefore, listening to the point of hearing is itself the first ordeal or struggle with the ego I, and it can take a long time, especially if the devotional impulse, the self-transcending impulse, and the great intention of the individual are weak. By my now and hereafter ever given sign, and through the words of this testament, and all the told play and words of my teaching time, I will always be the heart teacher, the true heart master, in relation to anyone who formally enters into this listening process, that becomes true hearing, and this necessarily devotional process of listening and hearing must, by grace, lead progressively toward true seeing or spiritually activated life in practice. But the process of listening and hearing is not itself a necessarily or otherwise fully spiritual practice, unless true hearing goes on to do its work in the seeing context of the advanced and ultimate stages of life. And until there is true hearing, listening in the way of the heart is itself the blessed, gifted, and inspired struggle for self-understanding, to recapture the direct feeling contemplation for self-transcendence. No one who has not yet heard me and seen me is, in the spiritual sense, able to most fully embrace me as true heart master, beyond acknowledgement, acceptance, and embrace of me as adept heart teacher, and the beginners yet to be fully spiritually responsible resort to me as true heart master. No one who has not yet heard me and seen me is truly and effectively able to practice what can be practiced only by those who have heard me and also seen me, or come to the divine person by grace, through most fundamental self-understanding, and through spiritual baptism in and by my mere and blessing presence. In the way of the heart, the direct revelation of the inherently perfect and necessarily divine mystery of the true heart master is the key to the process of spiritual, transcendental, and divine self-awakening. But I am seen in my ultimate mystery only by those who have heard me, become open-hearted to me, free of the motive of self-contraction in relation to me, and receive the baptism or tangible blessing of my spiritual and always blessing presence through contemplative, devotional, or feeling, and thereby really self-transcending regard of me. Therefore, it is only by true and effective fulfillment of the beginner's practice of the way of the heart, whether primarily by the devotional exercise of faith, or primarily by the devotional exercise of insight, and to the degree of real, true, stable, and responsible spiritual awakening, that the fullest, or truly and fully spiritual responsible relationship to me as the true heart master is realized. My great statements and confessions are not public announcements calling for casual belief. The great statements and confessions I make relative to my inherently perfect work as true heart master, my submission as servant done in order to teach, my self-nature realized as the divine self-nature, and my mere and blessing presence as the heart itself are, with all my uncommon speech, ecstatic confessions to those who listen to me with the heart, and to those who hear me at the heart, and to those who see me as I am. Those confessions are directly obvious as truth only to the heart itself, and to those who have been directly awakened to that obviousness by my great transmission of the heart. My great transmission of the heart becomes effective progressively, and it becomes or can become spiritually effective only in the case of those of my listening devotees who hear or most fundamentally understand my word and, on that basis, become my spiritually awakened and spiritually responsible devotees, steadily open-hearted in relation to my mere and blessing presence. Therefore, even though all my listening devotees and all my hearing devotees and all my seeing devotees resort to me as their true heart master or Hridaya Samatha Satguru, a functional distinction must be made between my role or my reception as heart teacher of listening devotees and hearing devotees, and my role or my fullest reception as the true heart master of seeing devotees. My heart-revealing word and the great opportunity to practice the way of the heart in devotional relationship to me should be openly communicated to all. And the first call is to listen. First listen and respond at heart to me as heart teacher, present in the form of my full given word, my stored leelas, and my bodily human and all giving sign, and, in a responsible and progressively self-surrendering manner, begin the counter-egoic struggle with the conditional self, whether primarily by the devotional exercise of insight or primarily by the devotional exercise of faith. It is only when that ordeal has become true hearing and then real seeing that any individual is called to demonstrate full responsibility, whether technically elaborate or technically simpler or even simplest, for spiritual practice in relation to me as the true heart master, fully encountered by my spiritual blessing function, and ultimately, truly and fully located as the heart itself, and thus by a progression of means to realize transcendental or self-existing divine freedom and self-radiant or inherently spiritual and bright happiness, or the inherently perfect truth that neither depends upon nor can ever be destroyed by conditional events. My work as heart teacher and my struggle to generate the teaching argument of the way of the heart in every detail is complete. Hereafter, those who are interested will simply consider my always heart-revealing word and leelas, and they will practice true devotion to me by means of self-surrendering, self-forgetting, and more self-transcending feeling contemplation of my own and revelatory and all-giving bodily human sign. Now my work is only that of the true heart master, standing free, always blessing all to listen to me and to hear me and to see me where I stand. And only those who have heard me and are moved to practice the ordeal of spiritual, transcendental, and divine self-realization can, in due course, also see me and at and as the heart. The way of the heart is the progressive practice or ordeal of self-transcendence or ego-transcendence, and of spiritual, transcendental, and divine self-realization, and that practice or ordeal is the progressive and ultimately inherently perfect demonstration of the eternal, ancient, and always new way of the Siddhas. The free descended or incarnate and also eternal masters who realize, reveal, and are the revelation of the divine person in the context of any or all of the advanced and ultimate stages of life. Therefore, from the beginning, the way of the heart, whether in the manner of the devotional way of insight or in the manner of the devotional way of faith, is the eternal, ancient, and always new way of self-transcending devotion to the divine person via and as self-transcending devotional communion with the Siddha Master or Satguru, and as confessed by all my listening devotees and all my hearing devotees and all my seeing devotees, I am the free descended and eternal Mahayana Siddha Master or Hridaya Samatha Satguru of all who practice the way of the heart, for I am the bright revelation of the divine person in the inherently most perfect or seventh stage form and manner. By virtue of divine self-realization and the spontaneous regeneration of the Siddhas or bright blessing powers that spontaneously accompanied my divine awakening, I made myself available to all kinds of listening devotees for the sake of their own divine realization. During the many years I functioned as heart teacher and generated my heart-revealing word and argument, I also fully communicated the way of the heart, and by all of that, I made myself forever available as heart teacher to anyone who, as my formerly acknowledged devotees, listened listens to me, or even hears me, and most fully, as true heart master to anyone who, as my formerly acknowledged devotee, hears me and receives me and sees me. Then, when my teaching work was complete, I retired from the ordeal of teaching, in order simply or merely to be present and thus to magnify my blessing to the world. Therefore, I remain thus, ever and forever now, and I am thus as I am, to remain forever perfectly effective, even after and forever after the physical lifetime of my bodily human form, and even after and forever after the physical lifetime of my bodily human form, I will remain thus and inherently perfectly and most directly effective by means of the continuous work of my true and formally acknowledged instruments, progressively and in due course, including all my formally acknowledged and true and fully seen devotees who, as formal members of either the lay renunciate order or the Naitamba Free Taoist order of sannyasins, also known simply as the Free Renunciate order, practice in the advanced and the ultimate stages of the technically fully elaborated form of the way of the heart, and my true and formally acknowledged agents, including my heart-revealing word, the by me empowered retreat sanctuaries, and my formally acknowledged living martyrs, who are to be specifically chosen, specially chosen, during and after and forever after the physical lifetime of my bodily human form, and in every then present time, from among those formal members of the Free Renunciate Order, who constitute my then living, formally acknowledged, bright gathering of fully awakened Free Renunciate devotees. Therefore, now forever, my every listening devotee, and my every hearing devotee, and my every seeing devotee will be given appropriate access to my word, my leelas, my given sign, and all my blessings, as these are preserved and otherwise transmitted within the serving culture of all the formally acknowledged and true instruments and agents of my great work, and the realization by grace of the divine person and condition will thus always continue to be served by my great means. If anyone wonders how this can be so, let him or her study the great tradition of the esoteric, spiritual, transcendental, and divine realization of truth. Let everyone who will study the great tradition understand that, although the way of the heart is a new and most full revelation made under, and also prior to, or beyond, the circumstances arising during the physical lifetime of my now speaking bodily human form, it is also most simply the eternal and ancient secret way that is the seed of all religions. If anyone doubts that all of this can be real, let him or her simply consider my word and my leelas, and observe and feel my bodily human sign until the reality of the way of my blessing company is authenticated by the heart. If anyone is interested in the realization of the heart, let him or her first submit formally and by heart to me, and thereby commence the ordeal of self-observation, self-understanding, and self-transcendence. If anyone realizes my true fullness in that first ordeal, whereby most fundamental and self-understanding opens the self-contraction of the heart, then let him or her go on to practice the fully spiritual and necessarily ecstatic or inherently self-transcending way of the heart, which begins as such when my mere and blessing presence that washes and forgives all in an instant enters the heart. Therefore, let all those who listen to me, and all those who hear me, and all those who see me, pass to and through all the necessary stages of life by grace. Let everyone else be happy. My heart blessing freely goes to all. I am the one I have declared myself to be. I am the one my listening devotees, my hearing devotees, and my seeing devotees come to know and openly to confess through love's revelation in satsang with me. I am the man of understanding, the heart teacher of my listening devotees and my hearing devotees, and my true heart master of all my seeing devotees, and in truth of even all my devotees. I am always already spontaneously present or heart-born. I was man-born or made apparent by a free descent of the spirit force, and thus by means identical to those through which the divine person embraces the likeness of every one of man. Therefore, my method of teaching was likewise to identify with mankind as it apparently is, and to submit to the company of human beings as they apparently are. As I did this, I constantly and spontaneously reflected each one to himself or herself, thus to awaken real self-observation, most fundamental self-understanding, and the free capability for self-transcendence in each one. I did this in love, freely, openly, and not limited by convention, and through my recorded word and my storied leelas and my now and hereafter ever given and revealing sign, I will always do this in love until my listening devotees hears me and fully acknowledges me in love, and receives the baptism of my mere presence and my heart blessing that transmits the power of divine self-revelation and freely, fully embraces the ordeal of self-transcending and God realization or divine self-realizing practice. I am the first and the only one necessary to do this in the West, but I have come for all beings. Each one is my beloved. Therefore, I always love and serve you with great humour, tolerance, forgiveness, and blessing power. You must likewise love me as one loves and honours and feelingly approaches and serves one's heart teacher, and more as one loves and honours and feelingly approaches and serves and ultimately most fully spiritually communes with one's true heart master. And you must likewise enlarge your service to me, even in the context of your apparent relations with all beings, by transcending and thereby renouncing the habits and reactions of egoity or self-contraction. The one and entire great tradition of all mankind is the unique circumstance of my appearance and all my work. Therefore, in order that you may rightly honour and understand me, observe me standing free forever in the great tradition and circumstance of all and all. Observe me standing free everywhere in the great tradition, in every historical period. Observe my likenesses in all times and places and cultures, but know that my word and all my work is my own. Observe me now, standing free among those who served my reawakening during the years of my own ordeal of realization. Rightly understand and always honour the lineage of blessing in which I stand blessed, but know that my word and all my work is my own. My full given word and the extraordinary play of all my work is the one great and complete revelation of a divine person to originate and develop in the West, but my every word and all my work is given for the sake of all beings. Ahamdo Asmi, beloved, I am Da, the bright one, the divine and only person, the heart itself, the only and divine self of all and all, at last appearing in the West, and I have come for the sake of all beings. I have come in response to a world that has lost the essence and the fullness of the great tradition of spiritual, transcendental, and divine self-realization. My every word is given freely for the sake of all my listening devotees, and all my hearing devotees, and all my devotees who see me. Therefore, my every word is given to every one who is my own in every stage of life. My teaching revelation of the way of the heart is not defined, characterized, or limited by the ascetical orientation or the strategic effort to withdraw from apparently conditional, phenomenal, or psychophysical existence. Even so, the way of the heart requires a total conversion or reorientation of conditional, phenomenal, or psychophysical existence, and the perfect fulfillment of the way of the heart requires perfect and thus inherently perfect transcendence of egoity. Now that my teaching revelation is full, I have firmly and finally entered into the blessing phase of my work. Now I am merely standing here to bless and awaken all by the work of my freely given sign. Now and hereafter, since I am no longer active in my original play of teaching work, all those who turn to me must come to self-understanding through formal feeling contemplation of my now hereafter ever given sign and formal consideration of my full given and always heart revealing word and formal consideration of the stored leelas of my teaching work and my blessing work. My formally established and formally acknowledged community or total gathering of listening devotees, hearing devotees and seeing devotees, which community or total gathering includes even every individual who is a formally acknowledged and true practitioner of the way of the heart, is called to grant right and formal access to me in person and even also via the representations of my bodily human form, and to grant right and formal access to my instruments and agents, and to communicate, advocate and confess, or truly confirm and affirm my always heart-revealing word and leelas to all who would listen to me, and to all who do listen to me, and to all who, having listened well to me, have truly heard me. My formally established and formally acknowledged community, or total gathering of listening devotees, hearing devotees, and seeing devotees, is called to extend, or to be the extension of, my human regard, demand, and help to all who would, and to all who do listen to me, and to all who hear me, and to all who see me. And my formally established and formally acknowledged community, or total gathering of listening devotees, hearing devotees, and seeing devotees is called to provide appropriate and even sacramental access to my mere and blessing presence, to all who see me, and to even to all who truly prepared to contemplate my bodily, my spiritual and always blessing presence, and my very and inherently perfect state, and otherwise to provide all who see me, and all who are truly prepared to contemplate my spiritual and always blessing presence, and my very and inherently perfect state, with appropriate access to lay renunciate and free renunciate devotees, and to sacred places and other by me given means that are truly empowered and formally acknowledged by me during the physical lifetime of my bodily human form, or after and forever after the physical lifetime of my bodily human form, by the successive gatherings of formally acknowledged lay renunciate and free renunciate devotees, directly and formally extended from those lay renunciate and free renunciate devotees, formally established and formally acknowledged by me during the physical lifetime of my bodily human form, to act as instruments, or, in the case of my empowered places and things, and in the case of specially selected free renunciate devotees awakened and uniquely conformed to me in the seventh stage of life in the way of the heart, even as agents of the transmission of my word and work. I have given and called upon many means for the sake of the divine self-revelation. Therefore, and by these means, identify me, feel, and thereby contemplate me, realize me ultimately as I am, and do not ever withdraw from me. I will never withdraw from you. Abide with me in faithful love always and even from the beginning of your practice of the way of the heart, and by the champion of this practice that is the way of the heart, and be the champion of this practice that is the way of the heart. Therefore, my listening devotees, my hearing devotees, and my seeing devotees should be my bright advocates in this world. The transcendental or perfectly unconditional and inherently spiritual self and all in all, who is as all, is God, the source, the substance, the ultimate condition, and the very being of the conditional separate self of each and every conditionally manifested being and of conditional nature itself. The way of the heart, the way of the heart is to realize, and by means of realization, to be the bright, spiritual, transcendental, perfectly unconditional divine self. The transcendental, inherently spiritual, perfectly unconditional divine self is the only one who is. All conditional appearances, all relations, and the feeling of relatedness itself, all others and otherness, and all separateness of presumed self are apparitions made by apparent modification of self-existing, self-radiant, and necessarily divine being itself. As soon as the awareness of conditional nature arises, the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self may also experience the illusion that it is not itself, but that it is a conditional self or egoic body-mind among others in a conditional world that it cannot account for. From then on, there is the struggle to achieve ego survival against opposition and to achieve joy. If such an ego I encounters the person of the word of one who has realized the truth, and who is thus consciously being the self-radiant, or inherently spiritual and transcendental, or unconditional and self-existing divine self in person, then the way of divine self-realization can become attractive and a new way of life is possible. However, the struggle as a conditional self, even to the degree of non-response to the revelation of the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self, tends to continue until the heart listens and by hearing and seeing the truth opens by grace to the way that is the heart itself. The transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self in the context of conditional nature is, it appears, a conditional self, or even a conditional contraction in relation to conditional nature. In the egoic case, the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self falsely presumes itself to be limited and threatened and associated with a great power of multiplicity that is not the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self. Thus, the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self feels identified with a conditional body and a conditional mind, and the conditional body-mind thus functions not only as the means of perceiving and relating to all that is not self, or apparently not the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self, but it also functions as the seat of contraction from all that is apparently not self. The way of the heart, whether in the manner of the devotional way of insight or in the manner of the devotional way of faith, begins with the process or ordeal of listening, or a reality consideration of the conditional self and how it operates as self-contraction. This becomes hearing, or most fundamental self-understanding, operative as the free capability for self-transcendence. When sympathy with the self-contraction has fully relaxed by these means, the beginner's original or foundation feeling motive towards self-transcendence is uniquely magnified and activated, such that it becomes a directly and comprehensively effective impulse. When that impulse has thus become really directly and comprehensively effective, the same feeling motive or open heart goes on to the next stage of the way of the heart, which is seeing, or heart attraction, and spiritually activated heart response to my spiritual and spirit baptizing presence, and thus and thereby to the spiritual and spirit baptizing presence of the divine person. This spiritual heart response, or this spiritually activated devotion to me, and thus and thereby to the divine person, permits an infilling with the divine spirit or self-radiance. And that infilling or constant baptism permits the fully responsive practice of the way of the heart, so that by stages the theatre of egoity is outgrown in the fullness of divine self-realization. As spiritual, transcendental, and ultimately divine realization becomes progressively profound and transcendental, an inherently spiritual, divine self-position is assumed more and more directly and ultimately inherently and thus perfectly, and conditional nature or conditional others, conditional body, conditional mind, and conditional self are ultimately transcended in the self-radiant or inherently spiritual and transcendental, or self-existing and perfectly unconditional divine self. Therefore, it is realized that there is only the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self, and that the not-self, or all apparent separateness and otherness, is an illusion or an illusory, or merely apparent, unnecessary, and non-binding play upon the transcendental and inherently spiritual divine self. Thus, it is realized there is only love bliss, self-existing and self-radiant, and by merely being that, the deluding, binding, and joy-suppressing power is transcended. Da.